And welcome back to the Authenticity in Action podcast. And today you're going to love this episode because I'm very excited to speak to the one and only Tucker, a man that can go by just his surname and people go, I know who you're talking about. So if you've been in the CrossFit space, you will know of Jeff Tucker. If you have not crossed paths with him in his very long and storied and diverse career, you are in for a treat because I'm really looking forward to digging into this conversation. And every guest that comes on, I ask them to give me a little bit of a bio, how they describe themselves. And I think Tucker's is one of the best I've had by saying that you just want to be a man of service.
Yeah.
And you have done that over your career from fireman, EMT, bomb tech, arson, like gymnastics coach extraordinaire, gym owner, there's coach. There's so many hats that you've worn. So welcome to the podcast.
It's good to be here. My pleasure.
It's really great to finally connect with you. As we're talking about just before we recorded, we have got an awesome mutual friend in Mr. Chuck Bennington, who I'm waiting on scheduling to get he and Vanessa on the podcast as well. So this might give him a push to go, hang on a minute, Tucker's beaten me.
I can do that.
Yeah, he's so I've heard a lot of stories and about who you impactful, I should say, how impactful you've been on people's lives. So I thought it was great to bring you on. So let's kick off. I know that you've been a big advocate for psilocybins, and I know that they have, like, you've spoken about how it's impacted your life.
Yeah.
How has going into that sort of exploring that territory, which a lot of people are kind of still a bit scared of and, unsure of, how has it influenced, I guess, your sense of self and your ability to live more authentically? And what led you down that path is probably a better lead in.
Yeah, probably so. I hope your podcast has enough time. It's just not one of those answers that's so easily given, let alone easily described. I really appreciate the lead in because I like to think that I'm a man of service. I think that's what my father raised me to be. He too was a firefighter. And so I grew up in that, and I want to continue that. And that's one of the things that I plan on doing authentically, if you will, with a new platform going forward. I guess we can get into that later. But what led me to it was probably a great many things. There's no one answer for that. A myriad of things did. Controlling anger led me to that. Using alcohol as a mask led me to that. Even using adventures or fitness or other careers have led me to that. So, what I've learned in my short 62 years here on planet Earth is something was missing, and so I started doing some research for, I guess whenever I hit my low point, I started doing some research into what psilocybin was, what DMT was, why were these therapeutic plant-based medicines being used, right? And so the more I dove into it, the more interested I became in it, and probably spent about 6, maybe almost 8 months before I really decided to go on the rabbit hole myself. But a lot of it just, in 23, the year of 23, I just really noticed that PTSD was kicking up a little harder than normal. Anger was kicking up really quick and a lot more vivacious than it used to be. And I started just really doing a true check and accountability on myself. And the more I dove into that, the more I realized something's got to give, and it needs to give the right way. So I just decided to, at one point, I was going to go down to a place called Ambio, which was a combination of Ibogaine and DMT therapy, and had found that because I had actually done some research on Sean Ryan's podcast, which I thought was incredible. Him and Trevor Millers, who runs that facility. Gave a wealth of information on there and a lot of history, and a lot of Trevor's history. And so I was really encouraged by it, especially from the results. But I'd also done some research. I'd reached out to Johns Hopkins Hospital and literally reached out to the gurus there, the doctors who had been doing the true testing in the lab. Because over here in the U.S., they were the only facility that had been allowed to truly do lab testing. And their data was amazing, And then there's the anecdotal thing. I went to Dr. Peterson's podcast, and, listened to what he said about psilocybin. And so all of it seemed, I wouldn't say necessarily a magic bullet. It seemed intriguing. Scared the shit out of me, to be honest with you. So I kept diving into it. And I actually called my good friend Chuck Bennington. So it's funny you mentioned Chuck. Called Chuck and I said, "Hey man, just want to let you know this is what I'm about to do. I'm going to Mexico, down to this resort. I have got to make a change. Something's wrong here." And he goes, "Well, wait a minute. He goes, "First off, tell me what's going on. What's your intention? All this." And I mean, I was a neophyte. I didn't know honestly what the fuck I was doing. I just knew that something like this, that just seemed to be the avenue and the area to go to. He goes, "Look, I know you. I know you want to be down in some quasi third world country at a retreat, being stuck somewhere and maybe not being able to get out. And we had done some research a little bit into it independently without knowing." And he said, "You need to come to Austin." And I said, "Austin, Texas? Yeah, you need to come down to Austin. I need to talk to you." So I met Chuck in Austin and we talked and was able to find a better way to dip my toe into the water, so to speak. And so really glad that I did. I vacillate back and forth whether or not I just should have went for the brass ring in the beginning, but I'm really very proud of the journey I've been through the last couple of years. It's unfolded the way it's needed to. I'm a firm believer in that the universe kind of shows you what it needs to show you.
Yep.
Especially when you're sitting there screaming at it to, "Hey, show me something, show me a sign," and it's saying it's right there in front of you. Just read the damn thing.
It's right there. And that's one of my things is that I believe that there are no mistakes in this life. We wind up on the path we need to be. Once we, can sit and you can look at it, you're like, that's why all these other things happen.
Hindsight's 20/20, most certainly. But anyway, so the short story is I met Chuck and found a source and one that was a trusted source and kind of picked the right, I guess, whatever mushroom was calling to me for what I wanted. And sat down and wrote my intentions and was very specific. And that's pretty much what guided me to what plant-based choice I was going to make. And the funny thing of it is that we were supposed to meet. I had rented a cabin on a lakeside, remote. It could just be me and Chuck. He's going to be my wingman, and we're going to get through this together. Well, he had a family emergency, had to go to the hospital.
Wow.
The day of, and I just said, "Well, crap, we'll just need to do this another time." And all the while I was actually lying to him. I'd made up my mind, come hell or high water, I'm doing this.
I'm going. Yeah.
And so I sat in the parking lot for probably about 10 minutes outside of their office. And he said he watched me for a while. And then I just took a left and headed south and went and got a different place and on the water and decided I'd do it alone. And then I guess I called him maybe a couple hours beforehand to let him know. And he's like, "Whoa, wait a minute." I'm like, "Well, I think I can handle this. I got it made. No big deal." And of course, the ego is just in full force. The wrong part of the ego is in full force. But anyway, I told him I had a phone and I was good and in good headspace, and that I would, I'd let him know the outcome. Not really realizing the lion's den that I was stepping into, but just so fucked up in my head that I thought, I got this. Look, I used to stand over bombs for a living. I used to run into burning buildings. This ain't nothing, And really went in there with that, even having the intentions that I had. I was ceremonial in approach, and tried to be contritious in it and do it the right way. And I basically had my ass kicked for about 6 hours by myself.
Yeah.
That may be too much for you there.
No, That's great, because why I created this podcast was to talk about people's journey into authenticity, their perspectives on it. And, there's a lot of things that, this is not anything I've necessarily been exposed to, widely. And having Mike G on the podcast recently talking about his experiences,
Yep.
and, it was quite powerful. I know I've had some conversations with Chuck as well in the past. And, it's something that people can be afraid of and have misconceptions about. So, by having a broad diversity of people come on and talk honestly about their experiences through life, I want to take away some of the intimidating factor of things
Sure.
and the myths.
Sure.
So I think it's great. The more openly and honestly that people can talk. And I think, in your journey, you firstly displayed amazing self-awareness to go, I don't like what's happening here. Like, I don't like the way I'm feeling and behaving. And a lot of people, particularly guys, will just brush it to the side. Like, no, it's nothing. But you had enough awareness within your true character to be able to go, pump the brakes. Like, I don't like the trajectory that this is heading on.
Well, and that's that. What's sad is, it's funny. I always kind of make a joke that I'm a late bloomer, which is a really sad way of saying I'm slow on the uptake.
Yeah.
Which really sucks sometimes. But I, it was after several years of really just downward spiral, falling slowly. It probably one of those slowest train wrecks anybody could ever watch.
Yeah.
But when I did make up my mind, I made up my mind, and I had done enough research to feel good about it, and I knew it was a bit of a boogeyman, but that didn't really scare me. And I agree with everything you just said. I think the more we talk about it, the more we get it out there. I mean, the most thing I had ever done in all of my life was maybe take a puff off a joint in high school, and then I became a career firefighter, and, drug testing is part of our life. And so, anything I ever had was alcohol, which I thought I handled it pretty well, but evidently I was a dumbass there as well. But, to put it correctly, but it's so funny that there were just so many. We have life markers that we believe that we have control of. One of them was the death of my father in 2014. 7 months later, the death of my youngest sister. Both of those were tragic ends that didn't have to happen. And, you deal with that grief in ways that you think you're coping with it, and you're not, and then pile everything else on top of the pile, not to mention your past history and life experience and those things that you've chosen to ignore that you've got controlled or you handled them. I think PTSD is one of those things that's just thrown out almost like aspirin sometimes. It's a thought or a diagnosis, but the reality is it's very real, and it's relative to the individual and the life experience of the individual, right? So and I think that's huge too, to recognize it's not just because somebody maybe has anxiety or has ADHD or PTSD. There's so many different levels of that, and their background and their physical makeup and what they're doing is going to have cause and effect with that too. So
it's going to be very different for each person. It's not just like, you've got measles, this is how it presents.
It would be so simple.
I know, and but unfortunately, it gets stuck in the same barrel as just, that's because it's kind of invisible. Like, there's no physical, like, oh, my arm is bleeding or cut. There's a lot of physical symptoms. People can put it in a barrel and dismiss it as just, oh, that's an excuse for something, or they're just lazy, or sometimes it's depression. And it really takes people who suffer requiring a lot of strength, when perhaps they're at a period where they don't have a lot, to be able to advocate for themselves and keep pushing for. And again, this is something that I think is valuable talking about, is to remove some of that stigma around it, that it's not just, service people that suffer with it. Like, someone can have trauma in their childhood and have
absolutely,
and
absolutely. I want to say something to that, because that's a striking tone of, we all have trauma. We've all got our baggage. We all have our beast of burden that we're bearing. And again, those are things that we can't physically see, right? In you or you and me. And because of that, again, I think it's just as simple as thinking that, well, we've got it handled, or we're going to mask it, or we're going to do this. And, you look at somebody and say, well, what the fuck's wrong with that guy? Why you got to be alone all the time, or,
Yeah.
Why are they so gregarious? There's all these things, right? But absolutely, trauma, I think, plays a huge role in frankly, our development.
Yeah. And even when you feel like, so, up until, a few years ago, till I went down a path of like digging around in some stuff, like I would have said, well, my childhood wasn't the worst childhood, was okay. Like, I had, he was not a great human, my father, and there were, a lot of complexities, but generally I would go, oh, well, I was a normal country kid kind of thing.
Yeah.
Then, I used to be, I probably still am, I don't know. I used to be quite polarizing with people. They either really loved me or really hated me, and there was no middle ground, and they would flick from one to the other. Like,
I don't know what that's like at all.
No, it's just overnight. And running a gym, you've got staff, and I'm like, why can't I, so I went down this path of going, thinking, like, why am I polarizing? Like, what could I do better? How can I manage people better?
Sure.
Through the course of therapy, a lot of this stuff was unpacked, and I was like, shit. And, events that happened to me as a kid that I thought, were no big deal, or realized that I completely blocked out entire segments of life. I'm like, And then came the realization that, I was actually gay and a whole heap of other things. I'm like, that explains why I'm always uncomfortable and fighting. And you're like, didn't say. And it's funny, Chuck, as part of our coaching, he was one of the first people that I actually came out to go, well, this is what I think's going on. And he's like, yeah, well, thanks for getting here. We kind of already figured that out, but good chat. And I was like, oh, well, shit, hey.
Yeah.
But, that trauma, which, when people think of trauma, they think it has to be some grand thing, but it can be, when we're developing and we're young, particularly, things stick that you don't even know have stuck and impacted the way that you perceive yourself, perceive the world. And then as we get more evolved, they grow into bigger things we don't even realize.
Well,
and
the
they affect
values.
us.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on you there. Finish that thought. I want to follow up with that then.
No, it's just about that they affect us in ways that we don't even consider as a possibility as adults, because you're like, well, that happened 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Like, I've moved past that. Like, but we haven't really, because we didn't have the ability to fully process it cognitively and unpack it all.
Absolutely. And what I was going to say to you there too, because it struck me, to think of the values and the value systems that are put upon us that we also are told to put upon society at large, right? Or the things that are important, or supposed to be important. I think that's one of the things that, well, there's so many things that came out of my first experience that I realized that so much of the things that I gave weight to, that I gave value to, a waste of time, waste of energy, waste of time, wasn't going to really result in anything as far as a betterment for myself or those around me, so that was a really nice part of going through that and realizing that all these things that I thought were so important, they don't matter. They don't matter, or they don't have the weight that maybe I needed to think I needed to give them back then. And
and I think
or people's opinion, of what's it mean to be this or that, right?
Once you can strip away defenses, and whether it be through these sort of therapies or whatever else you decide to do, once you get rid of your filters and defenses, suddenly it's really easy to go, oh, that thing I don't need to bring forward, or this thing I think is amazing, or this is where all my time and energy is going. It really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so I guess through your experiences, and you had to really embrace vulnerability to be able to say, okay, I don't like where I'm heading, but also then to, call a buddy in Chuck and say, hey, like, this is what I'm going to do. This is where I'm at. Like, I'm not, not happy with where things are at, and have that honest conversation.
Yeah.
But when you're in that altered state of consciousness, for want of a better word, and you are very vulnerable on many levels in that state, how does that feel to then challenge our society's norms, I guess, that we're expected to conform to, because you've peeled back all those filters about who a man is supposed to be, what I'm supposed to be, and the stories you've been told throughout your life, like this is who Tucker is.
Sure.
So how do you sort of reconcile that when you can peel back and you get rid of all of those expectations in that vulnerable state and be able to embrace that and go, this is okay?
Well, I really want to understand the premise of your question. So, are you talking about before or after going into the rabbit hole? I'm kind of curious. I want to make sure I understand your premise.
Well, I guess you had two stages of it. Before you went in the rabbit hole, you had to, reach out, and you're asking people questions about these therapies, and then talk to Chuck and be vulnerable with, like, this is what I'm thinking of doing, like, because of all these things going on. And then when you went in the rabbit hole, you are completely vulnerable and exposed in that process. So I guess you've got two different layers of having to embrace vulnerability, which is a key part of authenticity, is like, and they're scary as fuck.
Well, and then there's a third one after you come out, so, because you're changed after you come out. I think before, again, that statement of, hey, Chuck, I've got this, don't worry about it, I'll call you when it's over, kind of thing, right? I mean, how much bravado is in that statement, right? But also it was so much of how I lived my life. I got this, I can handle it. I've made the joke, hey, I've stood over live bombs for a living. This is nothing. I got this.
Yeah.
So that tells you a lot about that particular part of my ego, which I think ego is important. But one of my intentions in this was to, we call it an ego death. But it's really to get rid of that part of the ego that's not serving you, right? Another one was to get rid of anger, because anger was not serving me. Another one was to get rid of addiction, because clearly I was, I don't think I was an alcoholic, but I think I was damn sure using it wrong and too much and badly. But it was a masking thing, right? So another one was, how could I be, truthful to those around me? And that means authentic, right? And truthful to myself. And, then another one was just to be able to accept being happy. That hey, you really can be happy, and there are ways to go about that, and accept a compliment, for example. I tend to self-deflect a lot of things that are thrown my way as compliment, but there was that. And then, so I had my 5 intentions, and I not only hit my top 5, I think I hit my top 10, and then once, and it is vulnerable to tell somebody. I don't think I've ever really necessarily had a hard time letting somebody know, hey, I'm in a tight spot, especially those that I could reach out to that were maybe past service people or operators. Or I think one of the reasons I got along so well with so many people in CrossFit was because of that background, possibly. It was a bit avant-garde, service-oriented, operator-oriented in the beginning, but then I got to where I found a great connection with soccer moms, or dads who were dentists or whatever, But that vulnerability to reach out to Chuck, when I did that, he'd known me for a long time. Chuck started with me working the 5 a.m. class because nobody else wanted to teach it, but he knew me, and he knew that I called him. There was a reason for the call, and it was bad, So I was able to handle that vulnerability side of it probably pretty easy. But I had tried to reach out to some family members prior to and let them know, hey, I'm kind of researching this and thinking about it. And I got a bevy of reactions. All some of them were like, Dad's fucking lost it, that kind of thing. But once I had made up my mind, and it's even before going to set up the trip in Mexico or eventually going to Austin, once I had made up my mind, hell or high water wasn't going to keep me from this. I knew there was something there because I'd done my due diligence. I didn't want to have a trip. I wanted to change. And, I believe, fervently in the research and the reassessment of neurologic pathways and neural pathways being reconnected and reopened and set again in a better way, a reset, if you will, for the brain. Not to mention all the other great things that could come from it. But then being in the rabbit hole, I really also thought, my beginning journey was kind of a kick-ass journey, but really, only on about 3 grams, which is, really, really a beginner. But If anybody told me that right after I came out, I'd call them a by God liar. Evidently I had a lot of shit to deal with,
Yeah.
But I was extremely vulnerable within to a level that I had never been before, and reduced to a very base level. And that was interesting. I mean, I've been journaling here lately, and I'm getting ready for another journey. And literally next week, I'm going to a place for an ayahuasca retreat.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and going to kind of dip my toe there as well. But the whole point of bringing up that conversation is my plan is to really write about this so that there is a pathway for other people to read and understand, no matter what your background or what you're doing, that this could be an alternative for you. And I, within the last 2 years, with everything that I've done with it, I'm an absolute believer in it. It's a game changer. It's not just a life-changing event. It truly is a game changer for how to help live your life a different way, in a better way, without some of the things that weigh us down.
Yeah.
But then, I think the final thing I'll say is when I came out of it, I mean, there's, nobody could have prepared me for it. Nobody. The only analogy I can give is, I can tell you what it's like to put on 84 pounds of gear, and I can tell you what it's like to go running into a burning building, and I can tell you what it's like to fight fire, and then, maybe help somebody and come back out. But until you do it, you're never going to friggin' know.
Yeah.
And you're never going to know what other demons you're dealing with, of your own fears, your own, ideas of self-sacrifice, or, fight or flight syndrome. How do you handle your adrenaline? Those kinds of things. Are you really up to the task? Especially because that's a pretty extreme task, I think. And yet you're still never going to know. So it was the same thing with going through my first event. I was nowhere near prepared like I thought it was, and I damn sure wasn't in control. And it's a good thing that I wasn't in control of it, because I would have tried to lie and guide my way through it a different way. And I tried to do that, but wasn't allowed to.
Yeah, and it's taking away the ability to make a conscious change or to put a barrier up, because you just you're literally on this train and we're going on this journey, but I'm not in charge of it. And I think
you're not masking anything there.
Yeah. And I think that one of the powerful things that you did throughout that whole you did your due diligence. Like a lot of people like, oh, I'm just going to go and get some of this stuff, and I'm going to go and do this thing, and it's going to be great, and all my problems will be fixed. But I think the thing that I'm seeing from your journey and your story, which is, it's great you're going to write about it, is the work that you also have to do. Yeah. So people talk, even, I use the example a lot. I was talking to someone about gratitude, and they're like, there's actual work in being grateful. Like, it's very easy to sit there and go, oh, I do my daily gratitude journaling, and, I'm grateful for my cup of coffee and the But when you actually get deep into gratitude, like you are deep in the hole, and you really have to find something, that's the hard work. And that's usually at the point where people will take a step back. And this process, it's not just, yeah, look, I had an experience and I went on this journey and I'm good. Like, there's a lot of work when you come out of it. Then it's like, okay, what's the work that I have to do now to continue this when I'm, just Tucker walking down the street? Like, I can't walk around all day, pumping, mushrooms into my system, because then nothing's going to get done. Yeah, but you've actually got to do hard work to reconcile the journey, I guess, if you want to talk through that sort of experience.
Yeah, it's funny. So people will ask me, because look, I mean, a lot of people, those especially know me, they now I almost sound like a bunny loving tree hugger, a little bit like a hippie of the 60s, and so that's a little bit off for them. No longer the cowboy guru gymnastic guy on CrossFit kind of. He's still there. That guy's still there. I can still teach all that shit. But the thing of it is when you try to convey to them what's going on, And I have talked with several people since then. I'm working with several people trying to help them facilitate their path. You know, I really don't have the words to express the amount of of grappling with things of my own past trauma or my own past experiences that happen so quickly. And you know, I've used the analogy of like, well, imagine the Niagara Falls, you know, and trying to catch all of the water in your mouth at the bottom of Niagara Falls. That's how much information's coming in versus like drinking through a garden hose or a fire hose.
Yeah.
I'll drink through a fire hose any day. He'll give me 10 fire hoses, no problem, right? But it was like trying to capture all of that water at once, which is what I mean is like trying to capture all that information at once and then process and deal with it. And some of it is some very heavy stuff. And then you truly do lose track of time, which I think is a good thing because that way you're not hurried through. It was another thing I wasn't expecting, didn't know. Again, I was a neophyte. Heard people say it, didn't understand it. But going through all of that and coming out on the other side of it, extremely. First off, the first thing I felt was gratitude, absolute gratitude. Then I felt pretty proud of myself because I got through it, and I would never recommend anybody do what the fuck I did. Do not do that. No way. No. Have a wingman. Have somebody there. Have somebody taking vitals. You know, do the right path. Right. You know, hey, I was a former paramedic. You know what the hell? I know everything. Right? So anyway, I did it really, really badly, but came out on the other side really well. But I had done some preparation both through nutrition and made sure I was off no alcohol for 7 days and you know, oh my God, I thought that was such a big thing, you know, and it was, you know, so proud of myself, you know. But then, you know, coming through it on the other side, what I have noticed through all of that was it was extremely therapeutic. There were so many things that I dealt with, things I'd forgotten, things I knew I would deal with. And then, you know, I started journaling right afterwards and processing. It took a few weeks to process. And then circled back around the horn with my wingman and talked about that and talked with one of the guys who I used as a source and had questions. You know, there were things that happened during it physically that I just didn't understand. At times I would be cold. At times I'd be sweating. At times my breathing and yawning, like yawning. God, man, somebody's got to tell you about the yawning before you take this stuff, right? It's the most annoying thing on the planet. But there was a reason for all of these things. So there's all these intricacies of physicality that happened to me that I was unaware were going to happen and wanted explanation. And so my journey really started after, and then I kept digging more because I knew that there was more. I knew I left things on the table. There was more to work with. But I wanted to also process and maintenance afterwards. So, you know, I tended to do some microdosing afterwards, like a 0.15 or 0.25, and would use that therapeutically to a point to where, you know, didn't really need it. You know, maybe every now and then I might take a microdose. And most of that tends to be if I've got something I think really, really is going to be, you know, I need that serotonin and dopamine dump that day for what I'm dealing with or going to be working on physically. So, you know, afterwards, I've segued a little bit here for your question, but, you know, what I did know is that it was a transformative event, right? Even before, I mean, by the next day, I knew it was transformative. And oddly enough, it happened on my father's birthday, which was also Father's Day. And I had gone from there to go see a couple of my children who were working nearby at a camp as counselor, and met with them. And, you know, evidently I passed the test. I didn't look like I'd gone through the ringer. You know, I was able to kind of get past them without, hey, what you doing down here? Oh, you know, we'll come see you guys. But you know, so, you know, you're not abnormal when you come out of it. You know, you're introspective and you should be. But dealing with it for several weeks and months and then realizing, okay, I've got this sect of information I've written down, you know, what do I need to be dealing with next and that, or can I set this off to the side and deal with the other things coming forward? And so, you know, I've only, you know, again, I'm a neophyte at this from a standpoint of experience. I've known several people I've spoken with who've done multiple experiences, and by multiple, I mean a lot, especially in the ceremonial realm. You know, but I think too, that's relative. What do you need? what is relative to you and what you're wanting to get out of it. But I've gone through the psilocybin journeys twice since then, and then I've done 2 5-MeO DMT experiences, and the last one that I went through, I figured, okay, I'm good for a while, because you just, again, you realize that there's a lot of things that you're dealing with. Now that said, there's so many checklist items that need to be marked before anybody even does this. I don't think it's for everybody. I would never say that. But I know that it has saved lives. People that I know who were on the brink, ready to check out. And so, getting them down the right path has been helpful to them. And then all of the information that's out there now, I don't know what it's like for you guys down under, but, here in the States, it's starting to become more of a regular conversation. And it tends to be more so right now in the realm of the vets because of the suicide rate of those coming back from war. But also, when you start digging into nurses, doctors, firefighters, those that tend to be taking on a great deal of other people's trauma, man, the suicide rate is pretty high. And so it's pretty striking, But anyway, I may have segued there. I'm sorry.
No. I've got a friend who was a paramedic for many years, and she's, PTSD, from that, and she's now studying psychology so she can go back and be a therapist that specializes in that, because it doesn't, after an event, you're all good, yep, and we just get on with the job kind of thing.
Right.
And things get, pushed, and, even only seeing like a small snapshot of, her experiences, it's, she said it doesn't get talked about. There's no specific help because she's been through all manner of therapy, and she's like, it's, people don't get close to that flame, they step away. So that's why she wants us to, and she raised a good point with me in that, and this is my own experience as well. It's like when people go to therapy, so you're fully conscious and you're doing your thing, you can game the system. Like,
oh yeah,
we
do that in daily life.
Yeah, you know how to give them an answer that they're not going to dig any further, or that is going to get you through the session or whatever, if you don't want to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And as kids, we learn how to game the system with our parents, and we do that. So like, it takes a incredible therapist to be able to see that you're navigating, not just dial in the session and help dig through that. To me, the way that you're describing these experiences, like when I had a cortisone injection in my shoulder, the therapist at the time said, the physical therapist said, it's like having 1,000,000% dose of anti-inflammatories in one go. And I feel like that this is like therapy in its purest form in each dose that you go through, where you can't game it, you can't navigate it. It's just going to be, and peel back all the bullshit and all the stories to go, this is where you're at, and here's your laundry list of things to work through.
Most definitely. And, for me, it's funny. At times, it almost seemed, especially in my first event, it seemed like a Rolodex, a mental Rolodex. Imagine the old style that you would turn, right? That physically was in my psyche, or, in front of me. I know that sounds so strange, but, it would roll and stop, and the card would come out and say, okay, well, Tucker, we're going to deal with this right now. And, I remember that going on for a while, and you're dealing with these things, and they're deep. And there's emotion involved. There's also some laughter involved. But what I kept noticing, again, I knew there was a span of time that was going. It seemed very, very lengthy. If I were to put a calendar on it, it almost seemed like I'd been in a month, literally. And that's hard for people to conceptualize. And yet I remember, just at one point saying, I said, hey, because I was talking to this, whatever this is, as though it was the universe, because the energy, or whatever you want to call it. Again, I sound like that damn hippie, right?
No.
All my old cowboy friends have disowned me now, right? And I remember literally begging for a happy moment. Like, I understand I need to deal with all this, but could I just have one moment? Just give me one, Well, it pulled one up, and, there's me and my dad in a 1959 Chevy pickup truck going to go fishing, and he's playing a harmonica, and life is great. And, ow, fuck that, motherfucker, we're back to the other work. And I could not believe, like, I mean, just the anger that I was feeling inside about, like, man, why? Could I have a little more of that? Like, sorry, we got other stuff to deal with. And when I remember processing that later when I came out and being grateful, that, okay, I had a breath, I had a beat, we got work to do. And for me, that's one of the things that I loved about it was, although it was difficult at times, and there are great things that are going on in the hallucinogenic realm, there are some beautiful things that also frightened the shit out of me, but there were some beautiful things that I saw. And I wish I was an artist so that I could paint them, and so there were so many things like that in these particular entities, if you will, just basically, communicated with me and said, hey, this is what we're dealing with, and so it was definitely Alice in Wonderland down the rabbit hole. It was, much more than what I thought it would be. But, I guess where I'm going with all of that is, it also creates something you said earlier. It creates that boogeyman, idea of what this is. And whether you're taking a cortisone shot or ketamine or what have you, there's all types of medicines out there for all types of reasons. But what I really was intrigued about this too was, one of my degrees is history, and Native American history was my minor in college. So I love the ceremonial, millennia that has been dealt with in plant-based medication, because shit, that's where medication came from, was plants, right?
Yeah.
So we get back down to that base level, and we're dealing with something that our ancestors have used for over millennia that we're aware of, and the reasons why and what they got out of it. It again just speaks to the purity of the experience, I think, and the purity of the approach, and the fact that it's natural. I like that. So there's a lot of things about all of that, but when you come out and you really assess. And I'll tell you this: the last thing I wanted to do was do it again. I really didn't want to do it again. But over time, as I processed and I did a little bit of microdose maintenance, is when I started to realize that, hey, I really am on a different path here, and accepting that new path, and knowing that that's going to create some pretty large changes in my own personal universe, and it did. Some of those have cause and effects too, but at least it's coming from a place of peace. It's coming from a place of gratitude. I was extremely grateful. I mean, just full of grace. I couldn't wait to call Chuck. I thought I had actually dialed him 3 or 4 times. It turned out, no, that didn't happen. No more reason. Get a wingman, kids. Get a wingman. But when I finally got in touch with him, he said, hey, man, I can hear you. And, sounds like you're still kind of going through it, but give me a call when you come back. I said, I will. But, before I get off the phone, there's so many things I have to tell you first, because I promised that I would express this to you before I let you go, and really just telling him how much I loved him and how much I appreciated him, and wanting him to know that I know that in past I have failed him, and I felt really moved to let him know that. And I said, but I'll get off the phone when I can talk to you like a normal person, I guess. And later in for about an hour, then we got to talk and catch up, and really got to let him know that everything was really good, everything's copacetic, and can't wait to reach him tomorrow and talk, at length. I did so many things wrong. I should have started earlier in the day. I waited late in the evening because I thought it needed to be dark. I keep a blindfold on. I'd look out at the lake. It looked like a damn Van Gogh painting come to life. Tulips looking at me, and I thought, what the fuck is going on here? But even that, was really quite beautiful, and it let me know that I was really truly in.
Yep. And I think, something you said there that was really important is having grace for the journey.
Yeah.
And I talk about that a lot in the work I do with clients, and, helping people who are, going through a life transition, whether they're coming out late in life or whatever, is having grace for their journey. Because quite often we get to a point in life and we're like, well, I have failed people, or I've done things wrong, or, and understanding that bringing all that stuff with you is not necessarily baggage, but it's like, it's equipping me with experience and skills to do this next step.
Right.
So it's giving me resilience. And then when we have the awareness to see that and not beat ourselves up for, we do what we do when we know what we know, but when we know better, the goal should be to do better.
Absolutely. And that's one of the, one of my biggest reasons for doing this and wanting to get into this work and this future platform is this, because the better way to put it in my mind is, imagine you have a graph in front of you, right? You're looking left or right. Down here at the very bottom in the left-hand corner is your beginning. But imagine you have a 5% course correction, just 5%. Well, imagine what that looks like in the course of a month or 3 months or a year or 10 years, right? All of a sudden that 5% can go to damn near a 100% course correction. And isn't that what we ultimately want? We want to be better. We want to be more healthy. We want to make better decisions. We want to let go of our own bullshit. Like, it will weigh you down, and it will also cause you to be so hypervigilant that you make the wrong decision, right? I mean, so if you can let go of that and not have the anxiety or the things that drive triggers, or deal with your past trauma, so that you realize it's really not anything that should weigh you down. It should be something, hey, I've learned from it. Now let's move on and let's don't recreate that, or let that force me to recreate another action that I've done in the past that I thought was healing, that was really hurting other people, right? And so I really, man, I know this. We can use the old analogy. Imagine if you tell somebody to raise the bar correctly, and you shelf it correctly and put the weight above your head correctly, right? Well, then they get to achieve an incredible goal, maybe one they've never done before. And then we get to add weight, and then they get to be stronger, and all the benefits that come from that. But imagine if we just say, hey, go in there and grab the fucking bar and put some weight on it, just try it. That's not really going to give us a good result. So I kind of use that as the same thing here. I think the due diligence is important, the research is important, but also the evidence is there in front of us. So lots of empirical evidence to look at from this approach that has been frankly damaged by so much poor information. The 60s really screwed up a lot of people. I'm a child of the 60s, so I can say that. I remember growing up in it, but I mean, just so many stereotypical approaches to whereas now, I mean, just look at medicinal marijuana. Look how long it took for that to occur. I mean, why? So all of the evidence is there, and so my hope will be that when we talk about these course corrections are ways that it can benefit people, realizing it's relative to the situation, relative to the person, what they've got going on in their life, what their goals may be. But a lot of people that I've been able to help lately have just been strictly through simple microdosing. Just dealing with, I've gotten off Adderall, and I'm not looking for a replacement, but getting off Adderall is not easy when you've been on it since age 18 and you're now in your 30s or 40s or 50s. It has an effect. So things like that, or dealing with anxiety, or definitely with the guys and gals I've dealt with in PTSD. But it's a hard battle going on right now out in the trenches, where getting senators and congressmen and representatives to understand it. When our own FDA recently did not approve its usage after all the multiple studies done in the lab with John Hopkins, is really disappointing. So it just means the battle's going to be ongoing. But we are. Go ahead.
It is that credible, it's not just, like you said, the 60s probably did a disservice because people have those stereotypical, perceptions.
Yeah.
But, there are credible sources researching, analyzing, creating data, like John Hopkins is not just someone's backyard. Like people go to that and go, oh, well, they study at John Hopkins, or they, even from this side of the world, that's a name that has, scientific basis and credibility.
Well, the peer reviews are being shared country to country.
Yes. Yeah. And it's, so there's now like people doing the hard work in creating like rigorous information around and education and testing. And you're right. It doesn't seem that, like anything that we, it's very easy for people just to prescribe a one size fits all. But you said very early in the piece, which I thought was interesting, you, after talking to a supplier, were drawn to a particular sort.
Sure.
mushroom,
Sure.
based on what you've got going on, rather than putting one big blanket over it, kind of
Oh
thing.
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And it's, I think, important for people to understand that it's not just a generic branded thing like aspirin. Like, I'm going to take, and it requires that due diligence and being prepared to go, okay, here's the work. And it's
Right.
not just going to be the magic pill, which everyone looks for and everything.
Yeah.
And I think your work as, your life history as a coach, once you're a coach, you're always a coach. And it seems like now, apart from, teaching the people to dangle from a bar effectively, it's about, okay, how am I going to coach you through this journey of exploration, for want of a better word, and figure out who you are and take you through that. So if we look at Jeff Tucker today sitting in front of us versus, at the height, for example, of when you were coaching athletes. And when we talk about CrossFit, there's a quest for perfection, whether it be in movement or performance or aesthetics, or, that's the driving thing where people can often get stuck. How do you think that Tucker today would approach helping an athlete, like when you can see that they're masking and just believing their own bullshit, versus Tucker 1.0?
Oh shit. This may be part 2 of your podcast. It's so interesting that you say that. And I've had some real recent, because I left CrossFit in 2019. For what I thought were very positive reasons that I didn't agree with some of the management. We'll leave it at that. Yeah. I'll dive into it if you want me to, but again, that's part 3 of the podcast. But what's so funny is I was talking with one of my coaches, and they traveled with me quite a bit. Matter of fact, down to Aussie as well. And it was always interesting to me that when I went and taught a course, and this is, I mean this in the most humbling way, okay? I really, really do. I really felt like the course was never about gymnastics. Now, we taught movement, right? And we, I had to create the syllabus on my own. And I'm, and some of it in the beginning, I'm shooting from the hip, like ready, fire, aim, not ready, aim, fire, and learning how to make this fit into this community. And we wanted to be of service to this community. We also want to be a voice of reason in this community, right? We do not throw everything and the kitchen sink at a muscle up, which counts for 0 fucking points in gymnastics. Doesn't mean shit. But it's a movement used in CrossFit, right? So there's a big gamut there, between the two. But the thing more to the crux of your question, I always walked away from a course feeling like everybody in that room was looking for answers, and it damn sure wasn't what we were teaching. And I know that. I don't think it. I know it because of the conversations that we would have, at break, or the conversation we'd have at dinner that night at the social, or the conversation before leaving, or when I, and I never closed a course without letting anybody know that I really believe that what we're here for is to be of service. Like I challenge every coach in the room or every participant in the room that, your marching orders to go forward is to be of service in some way. And I don't give a damn if you're a doctor, a lawyer, a terrorist hunter, or whatever you are. That's what we're here for, right? And if you're a coach, which most of them were, you're here to be of service in your field, right? And yet, it really was clear to me that they made, you'd get a phenom come in there and they could do all kinds of movement. It was great, but you could also see that they were searching for something. And I know that just sounds so hokey, but it really was true. And the reason I also know that is because the empirical evidence that would happen after I left a course. I still get emails from people today, and I've been out of this a long time, but I'm talking about people who go all the way back to 08, 09. I still talk to Darren Kaufman down at CrossFit Newcastle. I talk about a crazy bastard. I love him to death, but even he, was searching for some things at that time when we met in Sydney in 08, 09, and so, I think people are, they are constantly looking and maybe because we are all as humans constantly hanging on to some shit. I may have segued away from your question. I don't know. Did I answer your question?
No, yeah, it's perfect.
Okay. I've never been called perfect before, but I will say this, back to your conversation part about perfect. I mean, we're never going to achieve perfection, right? But is that not always the goal? It's why we get up in the morning, why we have whatever drink we need to start the day, whether it be protein or coffee or tea or hot lemon water, whatever. We want to get out and do things, right? And we want to do them right or to the best of our ability. And when we don't, and when we can't, or when we're not, that's when we need to say, hey, let's take a pause and figure out why we're not doing these things.
And because I play golf. Golf's my thing.
I'm sorry.
And
you're better than me.
And I started it when I was a kid, and it was something I could always do without anybody else. And it was always my own personal search for something to find, I think many times I used it to define my value or my contribution or who I was, or find a spot to fit in. But I just, what you were talking about there is like, as humans, we're searching for something. I read a post yesterday on Instagram, and guy was talking about the process of going to the practice range. Like, we go to the driving range not to achieve perfection, but we're always looking for the next, the thing. And it's range meditation, I guess, where we work our way systematically through clubs. And then once you sort of feel your groove, you start looking for little things. But you just want that one glimpse that you're like, yeah, I'm on the right path. And I think, as humans, we can do that through a variety of ways, whether it's a sport outlet or CrossFit or, gymnastics or whatever. Because that you're never going to get there. Like, people look at professional athletes or professional golfers, they're not perfect. Like, they miss more than they make, but their misses are just better than ours. Like, and their degree is 1 degree. But it gives us hope to pursue something. But sometimes in that pursuit, we use that to cover other things that we're really trying to get.
Oh, no doubt.
Out of life. And having coached and owned an affiliate for many years, like, you see when people coming in, like, and the trick of really coaching them, which I think was powerful, the way that you described the seminars, and which Chuck often talked about as well, is it was never about the muscle up or the pull up or the movement. It was about, who are you as a person? If you come in and you just want that quick fix, or are you going to do the work? Because that's reflective of who they are in their daily life. It's 100% transparent. Like, there's gymnastics, I guess, a bit like golf. There are no shortcuts. Like, you can figure out how to do an ugly ass muscle up, but there's no shortcuts than doing the work that's going to refine those smaller and smaller skills needed. And the same with your journey through mental health, or dealing with stuff that you've worked through, is you've got to do those littler things and those smaller nuances that will help you. Like you said, you can say, yeah, I'm on top of this. I've defused bombs for a living. Like, I can stare death in the face. I'm good with this. Is nothing. Versus that nuanced work that you really have to do to push through. And being prepared to do the work, which you're like, yeah, I went through this experience, and now I need to unpack it and work through the laundry list. Some stuff will park, this is the important stuff, then bring, but I've got to get through this list, because if I go and do this again in 3 months, 6 months, a year, all this shit's still going to be sitting here, and it's probably going to be more traumatic this time around, or a harder process.
And I have nothing against therapy. I have nothing against psychology, psychiatry. I mean, all of it, all of these fields have their realm. They do. But what I'm starting to see, when you see those in that field starting to use MDMA therapy and starting to use psychotherapy, hallucinogenic therapy, that's where you start to really see that, okay, we are reaching outside of our normal box of tricks, and that excites me. It makes me happy. I think one of the things that it's gonna, I'll be long dead before this becomes a daily approach, I guess. I hope I'm not, but I think I will be, just because of there's so many things standing against it, both whether it be governments or agencies or, you know, everybody's got a damn study on something, right? Or what is therapy or what is plant-based medicine? But I do know this. I know that I can create an avenue for people if they just want to get information, right?
Yep.
And then, take the right approach. Here are the do's and don'ts. And, if I can create a path that shows, hey, this is what I went through and this was my experience. And then I know that I can create symposiums where we can come together and simply talk, or where I can create a true, I really want to be altruistic in this idea that I've got of a true open source, of what does that mean, and that it's not tied to a damn revenue stream,
Yeah. And that's kind of what I wanted to dig in next is like this next path or platform for you, like all of this, your lived experience and things that you've been through, you've spoken about, writing about it. What is your vision for your platform that you want to create for people in this space?
Well, I've been kind of doing it quietly already, and really I'm just one of many voices, but there's a couple of things I may be giving too much away, but I don't really give a damn. I think first off, I don't think I know. Let me be more affirmative. I know that there are people out there that need this path. They're looking for it. They don't know how to find it. So I want to create that pathway. I also want to break down some of the barriers of stereotypical views of this. So there's a little bit of thing to do there, a little bit of work to do there, a little bit being the understatement. I want to create an open source community that, if this is something that they're seeking, hey, there's so many sources and there's so many places to go, and there's a lot of good ones. And there are some unscrupulous ones, right? So that's another field there. And then, I really, because I have a little bit of a bias in the service industry from a standpoint of those that were, kind of in the trenches as operators or vets or firefighters and nurses and first responders, et cetera, police officers, what have you. I know what I've already done so far in helping them. And so, my future platform will be on a larger scale and more public. And so, it's got many shapes and forms that, I'm not ready to kind of throw out there yet, but it's going to take many shapes and forms to get it out in the community. And, just what we've been able to do on, I guess, the quiet scale and seeing the results from that. My heels are dug in, I'm ready to do it. So, and continue to work on me, but I'm talking with those that are, in the medical field as well, so that we've got some gravitas behind us,
Awesome.
Yeah. So that's, so that, and then talking with those that, there's some, Paul Sellis that's out of Oregon. That guy knows more about mushrooms than anybody on the damn planet, and so there's so much information out there. And I guess I also want people to see one thing, if nothing else, especially, those who might dig into my background a little bit. Nobody would have ever seen this coming from a guy like me, not that that's, I guess, weighty. Those that knew me would be like, well, I don't think I would have ever thought, Tucker would have taken a damn mushroom, and he looked like he had his shit together a little bit, or whatever.
Yeah.
Had them fooled. But no, I think being able to show what I want to repeat is what I've learned from other people who've gone before me, like Sean Ryan. I'm way impressed with that guy. He was very open and honest about what he dealt with, what he was dealing with, how it affected him, his life, his family, and how that changed everything for him. And you also lose some people along the way with this. You're going to. But I don't know. Maybe they'll come around and realize that I'm not just trying to be hippie and go on a trip. That's not what I'm.
And everyone. I often use this example when I talk about when we come out late in life, for example, that when we say to somebody, because you come out, every day, but you say to somebody and then they give you a reaction that you don't like or weren't expecting. But we need to have grace for their journey, because
Sure.
like I might have had 10 years to recognize this before I finally said something to someone. They've literally had 3.2 seconds, and they've known this version of Lisa for 46 and a half years. And now it's a different version, and they just need a hot minute. So we need to have grace to go, hey, I'm going to let you sit with this and we'll come back around. And you come to me when you want to talk more. So the same as this process is like, we need to give ourselves grace for the journey, but also grace for someone receiving it, that they're not ready to necessarily receive this information at this point in their life, but maybe in 12 months, 2 years, 5 years, whatever, they'll circle back around and say, hey, let's talk about this thing now.
Yeah, and it's just,
and that's okay.
It's absolutely okay, and that's a really strong point. They've had 3.2 seconds to think about it, right? And literally, I studied this for 6 to 8 months before ever thinking about pulling the trigger. And I'm not even sure that was long enough, but it was long enough for me, and I felt like I had the right data. But I think that's the other thing too, is that the information is out there. It's out there for the taking, and it's good information. And even with that said, it's not for everybody. It's really not. But yeah, I'm gonna have to use that. If you don't mind, I'll steal that from you.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So just as we start to wrap up, because I'm super appreciative of your time today, I get every guest as we end the episode to finish a sentence for me. So this is for you. So, because the premise of the podcast is authenticity in action, is that it's something that you live. It's not just a vibe, it's a verb. It's a doing thing. So the sentence is, authenticity in action is.
Wow. Authenticity in action is, I think, just being honest.
Yeah.
I really do. I think in all things. Because if we can't be honest, then we can't be that verb we want to be. That's my humble thought.
Yep. I think that's great. And it's a very common theme in that, we need to be, first of all, able to be honest with ourselves about who we are and what we want. And, rather than a curated version that we might put out to the world, because we'll do that to a degree. But, when you're brushing your teeth in the morning, can you look yourself square in the eye and be okay with where you're at and where you're going versus, you can't even look at that reflection.
Well, I want to say something to that, because there's been times that I've looked at that guy in the mirror and I have not been able to look him straight in the eye. And those are not my proudest moments, right? And I guess I could have let that weigh me down, and I could have let my naysayers or detractors keep me from, pushing forward. But I think that's one of the beauties of, if you can take that and say, okay, accept it with grace, and then change course. Because I believe everybody's able to change course. And it's okay if others out there don't believe that you have or can. That's not my problem. I can only show through action, authenticity, and an honest approach to life that I've made those changes, right? And my hope is that everybody can do that, just, we're so damn hard on ourselves, Lisa. Damn it, we really don't give ourselves enough credit, and me included. But I'm trying to do a better job of that.
Yeah, and we are have expectations, but most of those expectations we have for ourselves are things that have been handed to us. If we use the analogy, like, it's the stuff that we're given is like a football, so we can choose to carry it, or we can go, well, actually, this isn't mine, this is yours, and we can. But it's not usually until we get well down the track of life. I recently put out a book called Burn the Script, which is about when we're born, we're given this script, like, go to these schools, do these things. This is what defines being a good human. Wow. Then we get to a point in life where we're like, well, shit, I'm a 4th generation doctor, but I don't really like doctoring, but I did it because that's what. But that people feel stuck, but they don't realize that we actually can change that story. So we can change those if we're dealing with this weight of expectations, not even ours, you don't need to. You can put it down and go about your day.
And one other thing too, it doesn't always have to be traumatic to put it down and deal with it. Not everything has to be dealt with from a place of pain and anguish.
Yeah, you can just let it go.
Well, you can let it go, but I mean, even when you're dealing with it, you can be happy about it. You really, it doesn't have to be painful. I get that it can be. I've done that, but I mean, it can be also that you're letting some weight go. You feel lighter, and this is a better approach, and you're going to be better for other people. And you can accept that with joy versus like, oh, well, I gotta kick my ass a little bit here because I've got to pay some penance so that I can be better. It doesn't have to be that way.
No, you can treat it with joy that you're giving yourself a gift, because I'm letting this go right now is the kindest thing that I can do for me and for them.
Right.
Because like if I keep carrying this and then there's no relationship or whatever, if I let it go, maybe we can move forward in a better way. Like, and if I have the awareness precedes action. So I've got the awareness of carrying this thing, then okay, I'm going to be the one to let it go, and then you'll either follow or you won't. And it's just going to be what it is. And that's okay.
Yeah. And that was one of my biggest motivators in this is that, I mean, I'm a very strapping, attractive 62-year-old, but I don't really have, that many years, and all of our days are numbered. And I think that to me was the greatest epiphany and I've always known it, I think we all know it, but to recognize it and really say, hey, every damn morning is a gift. Every evening is a gift. I get to go to sleep in the hopes that I wake up tomorrow and do something else. And they're limited. They're numbered. We are not long for this earth. And we're all born to be food for worms eventually. But what we do between point A and point B is what's really important. And I think anything that we do that is a waste of that precious time is it's thwarted. It's gone forever. So why waste our time and energy? Let's do the work. Let's get it done, and let's get on with living the good life. I think we all capable of that.
Yeah, 100%. And we all deserve that. And I think that's another thing that we all need to wrap our heads around, that you can. It's there. You just need to give yourself permission to go do it.
So. And you said it. We all deserve it. We do. We deserve it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Tucker. I'm super glad that I reached out to you. I've loved this conversation, and I know that anyone that listened to it is going to get a lot out of it. And I really
I hope so.
And now I think this will give Chuck his thing to he needs to jump on, man.
I'll kick him in the ass. I'll make it happen.
But I'm super appreciative, and thank you so much. And I can't wait to see, as you start to evolve this new project and it comes.
I'll circle back around to you. I promise. I'm in the throes of it now, and I look forward to sharing that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.